This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
It's the Blood Red podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. I'm Guy Clarke. Thanks for joining us. Well, Villa visit on Grand National weekend following a mare in Madrid as the Reds still have hurdles to jump in both the Premier League and Champions League. Coming up, we'll be looking back briefly on defeat in Madrid, preview Aston Villa's trip to Anfield. Yes, the 7-2 will get a mention. And before we go, we'll bring you our team selections and match predictions also. Alongside me, two esteemed pod people. That's what we're calling them now, isn't it, Doyle?
Yeah, pod people. Yeah. We are, yeah. Pod people, pod persons, pod pickers. Yeah.
We were going to have Sean Bradbury with us, but we've got a three-ball to go with today here on the Blood Red podcast. And Doyle, I'll come to you first. We started the week on Monday full of optimism and the joys of spring after seeing off Arsenal. What's happened since?
I think everyone's realised that Real Madrid are better than Arsenal, and Arsenal aren't very good. I think it's basically the main take from this week. I would like to point out that I remember on the podcast on Monday when we were talking about, whenever we recorded, Sunday wasn't it? We recorded it on Easter Sunday, that some people were very upbeat on what to expect and were backing Liverpool to beat Real Madrid, but I was slightly more circumspect, as is my want. But they don't lose many games to the Real Madrid, so I wasn't massively surprised that Liverpool lost. But what I was surprised was how bad Liverpool played in the first half. They were absolutely appalling. In fact, if you take the Aston Villa game away, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just a freak, and I've maintained that ever since that game, that 7-2 game, which I'm sure we'll mention in a bit. But if you take that away, that first half was the worst Liverpool have played all season. The worst 45 minutes at the worst possible time against a team who quite clearly had set out to do a job on Liverpool, did it very well. But it wasn't any different to the job that Brighton did on Liverpool, to what other teams did on Liverpool, to what Burnley did on Liverpool. The difference is that Real Madrid have got slightly better players than Burnley and Brighton, so they were able to do it. They were able to, do the whatever Zinedine Zidane wanted to the letter. In fact, he mentioned after the game, didn't he? He said, "Look, hit the ball over the back of the fullbacks when they push forward," which is how they got the second goal, and look to play on the back, the centre back pairing of Nat Phillips and Ozan Kabak, because they've hardly played together. And that's how the first goal came about, and you could argue the third goal as well. So overall, Real Madrid may not be the Real Madrid of old, but they're still good enough to win that game. In terms of what Liverpool do, I'm sure we'll get on to Naby Keita in a bit, and that substitution it wasn't just on him, but it was a night where Jurgen Klopp, certainly with his team selection at the start of the game, got it wrong, and whatever the tactics were at the start, whether or not the team were actually able to do them or did what he wanted them to do, well, it just didn't work. So either way, it's either down to the tactics that he employed or the players that he asked to employ them. So it wasn't a great night for Liverpool. I think Klopp realises that. The only good thing is that the tie's not over, although I'm pretty right in saying Liverpool's history, they've only twice come back from at least 2 goals down. One of them was Barcelona, which, again, that was what was at Barcelona? What was at the Barcelona game that isn't going to be there on Wednesday? That's going to be supporters. So it's a tough ask for Liverpool, but overall, after the highs of beating Arsenal, bit of a low, probably the biggest low of the season.
Yeah, is it not sort of a bit of a screenshot, these last 2 results as well, David, just for Liverpool's season, really? After the Arsenal game, plenty of national press lavishing praise on Liverpool and saying how well they played. It was the best performance of the season. And then, as Doyle says, bar the Aston Villa game in the league, Real Madrid, certainly that first half, was probably the worst performance. There doesn't seem to be that level of consistency with Liverpool. I think sort of 2 pairs of results last season, Leicester City at home in the Premier League and away. One was probably a poor result, yet Liverpool still won when they were playing badly. The other, they were absolutely brilliant and put Leicester City away. This season, if they play badly, they're very much there to be taken, whereas when they play well, they need to be playing their best to get the good results this season.
Yeah, I think it feels, doesn't it, like every time you get a good result and a good performance like they did at Arsenal, as you start thinking about, well, okay, maybe they've turned a corner. But I think every time we do that and we convince ourselves that, this is what it's going to be like going forward, is you've got to think that all of the weaknesses that you've pointed out in past weeks are still there. That centre-half partnership, for example, just it is not... It's not Champions League quality, is it? And that's not to do down both players, are both elite level footballers. But Nat Phillips and Ozan Kabak starting at centre half in a Champions League quarter final against Real Madrid. It's no surprise that Real Madrid found some of the spaces they did in the box, and that line just got absolutely torn to shreds once a midfielder dropped a little bit deeper. So I think you've just got to think every time there's a positive result this season, you've got to think that those weaknesses are still there. Virgil van Dijk's not coming back. Joe Gomez, you still know Jordan Henderson in midfield. He's still. Klopp felt like he had to go and put Naby Keita in his midfield because he didn't want to just play that, what's on paper his best three for the remainder of the season. So, all those weaknesses are there. And I think managers always say this, don't they, and players, is that you can't get too high after the highs, you can't get too low after the lows. And I think that sort of, that way of looking at things maybe should work for fans this season, because I just think we've got to remember and remind ourselves constantly that you're never going to see Liverpool probably pulling off a series of 5 straight wins on the bounce this season, because the options and the quality to do that, the squad options in terms of rotation as well, they're just not there to do that. So I just think, it wasn't. I was surprised by the manner of the performance, but possibly not that hugely shocked that Liverpool didn't, that Liverpool got beat at Real Madrid this season, because you look what's on the pitch and that they're missing some big players, aren't they? And they have been all season. And then alongside that, some of the big stars are out of form because of what's gone before. So, not a huge surprise, but it's still quite disappointing to go from that level of performance against Arsenal to what they did against Real Madrid.
Before we talk about Keita, and we'll touch on Sadio Mane as well, because he's not having a great time at the moment for Liverpool. But Doyle, were you a bit surprised in that second half, after getting the first goal back quite quickly into the second half, that Liverpool then seemed to sort of go so gung-ho and almost look for the leveller on the night? As I would have thought after that first half performance, if they'd sort of been able to escape with a 2-1 defeat, you'd probably have thought Liverpool might be favourites for this tie, whereas conceding that third goal, certainly in the manner they did, really sort of leaves it in Madrid's hands now.
And you've got to bear in mind, when Liverpool were trying to be a little bit more, well, I wouldn't say defensive in the first half, but be a little bit more steady, that didn't work either. So, what was the difference going to be? It was a little bit like when they played Barcelona in the 3-0 game at the Camp Nou, where Liverpool at the end, when Barcelona nearly made it 4-0, it's because Alisson was about to go up for a corner. It's like, hang on, it's not even half time in this game. What are you doing? So he got back and made the save. And as we know, that he was there to make that save ended up making a massive difference with the tie. But that overall was an example of Liverpool. I think if you look at it, there's been a few games in Europe. I'm looking at the Villarreal, it was a long time ago now, but Villarreal Europa League game, the first leg where they lost 1-0, that was a game where Klopp went, right, we're going to keep this tight, and oh look, we got beat 1-0. I know they won the second leg and turned it around, but I don't really think it's in their makeup to be defensive. I don't know what you're trying to say, Guy, but I think they thought that because they got one goal, and don't forget they were up against a Real Madrid centre-back pair, and that while individually their experience was, I think Nacho's been there for about, well, he's played about 200 games for Real Madrid, and Militao was, 50 million euros from Porto, but they'd only played one games together as a centre-back pairing, so in that sense they were inexperienced. I think Liverpool thought they could get some joy, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work. And as we mentioned about Keita, but I'd like to point out Fabinho. And I think Fabinho was, given how well he played against Arsenal, I'm pretty sure I gave him man of the match for that game. Against Real Madrid on Tuesday night, it seems as though he was trying too hard against his former team. He wanted to prove a point. And you compare that to the way Casemiro, who I don't think is as good a footballer as him, he was just able to sit where he wanted and just play the ball to, was it Kroos and Modric, and then they, we saw what happened when they got the ball, and I think that's what Liverpool would have wanted Fabinho to do with Keita and with I've forgotten who played. Wijnaldum, yeah. And Wijnaldum, yeah. That's how good they played in the first half. I couldn't remember who played.
I don't think anyone played in the first half, did they?
Well, that's the thing, is that you can't just put it on Keita. We'll talk about it now then, shall we? Yeah. It was a massive statement to sub him with 3 minutes to go before half time. But what I will point out is that I wasn't surprised, because I think Klopp thought we cannot concede a third goal before half time. We need to do something right now. And I think he'd given him enough of an opportunity to make a mark in the game. While he wasn't the only person to be below par, because you look at Trent Alexander-Arnold again, he was another one who was very good against Arsenal in the first half. He was terrible against Real Madrid. He was better second half, but then that wouldn't have been too difficult. But Keita was the one that probably was worse than all of them. And unfortunately for him, I think he was introduced into the team to provide. I think the idea behind Jurgen Klopp's team selection was to run around a lot in midfield and put Real Madrid under pressure. No, Real Madrid was just as we saw, play the ball long. And with Fabinho not helping out the back four as much as he would normally have done, they were exposed, and Vinicius was able to make the most of it. And I thought Kabak did good up against Benzema. I thought he did well against him, but he still gets an assist for one of the goals. So overall, the
probably lucky as well, Kabak, not to give away a penalty. No,
I'm not sure on that one. I'm not sure. Not sure. If it had been Manchester United, it would have been a penalty. So it's one of those. I didn't even realise they'd got a penalty until this morning when I saw that. Anyway, by the by. Keita, I wouldn't. I felt a bit sorry for him because you got to bear in mind he started one game this year. Expected to come. It wasn't expected to come in and make a difference. He was just expected to come in and play like he has presumably been doing during training, and with his little cameos that he came on against Wolves and looked quite good for the last 10 minutes when he played there. So I think they were expecting that kind of energy, but with some of the other players not quite up to the level, as I say, like Fabinho, like Wijnaldum, who only started playing in the second half, that made it difficult for him. And with him being the one that came in, he was always going to be the one that made way first. And as I say, I presume Klopp just thought we can't concede a third one before half time. I need to make this change now, which in some ways was brave, but in the sense that it's put a lot of focus on Keita. Even after the game, Klopp said, "I kind of wish I hadn't done it now. If I'd have known that this was what people were going to be saying after the game."
What was your reading of it, Dave? Was it a case of singling out the individual in Naby Keita and him not playing well enough and needed to come off the pitch, or as sort of Doyle was referring to, more of a system issue of Naby Keita and Thiago are very different midfield players, aren't they? Liverpool getting passed to death, and you get a passer on yourself, it can kind of maybe solidify that midfield battle somewhat, as opposed to Keita, who's going to try and run around a lot more.
Well, that's it. I could see the sense in the selection that, as you say there, Thiago a bit more of a passer, and Real Madrid were passing them to death. So I think Klopp's thinking was we're not going to beat them at that. So don't go with Thiago, go with someone who can put them under pressure while they're doing that passing, while they're circulating the ball. Obviously, it just didn't work out like that at all. I thought with Keita, I don't think Klopp can throw his hands up now and say, "Oh, I'm not sure why there's such a big fuss about me doing this." Well, you know exactly why you're doing it in that moment. You didn't play well. I thought he was the poorest of the three. I don't think any of them played well, but I think he was the clear poorest of the three, and the less able to adapt to the game situation, and therefore that's why he got brought off. I think his Liverpool career is in a bit of trouble now, to be honest. Considering his long-term impact, it's just not been good enough, and to be withdrawn that early in a game of that magnitude, I think that's the beginning of the end, considering he's 2 years out from the end of his contract. I think one of the things about the composition of the midfield and one of the decisions Klopp got wrong in that, and something that Keita shouldn't sort of maybe shoulder the blame for, is that Kroos did so much of his good work, didn't he, dropping in almost to the centre half position and exposing that high line from a really quarterback position. And I think what Liverpool really missed there was Roberto Firmino. His intelligence in defensive phase of the game, in terms of he would have just pushed, because usually he'd be used to sitting on the number 6, dropping deep for a centre forward and sitting on the 6 and making it difficult. If Kroos had dropped deep in the way that he had, Firmino's got the intelligence to push deeper onto him, push into that centre half position, and tell the midfielders behind him that they need to step up again. And then that puts Liverpool in a better defensive position to put pressure on the ball. That didn't happen, and I thought Liverpool have got serious issues when they've named that front three that doesn't have Firmino in it, in terms of retaining the ball in the final third and the defensive setup for the press. And I think that as much as the midfield is what Jurgen Klopp got wrong, and I think that made the midfield look even worse, made Keita look even worse than he was, even though he didn't play well. And just the whole setup of the team was wrong, really. And the idea that, coming into this, you thought, okay, the way Liverpool played in 17-18 when they come up against Real Madrid, they got schooled a little bit. Liverpool have learnt so much in that time. Real Madrid are that little bit older. Surely this will make the difference. And they just showed, yet again, just more intelligence in situations, just a better ability to read the game. And that just killed Liverpool's tactical setup from the off. And I think the manager's probably got to take a fair share of the blame for that, because it was just so obvious from the first minute that Real Madrid were dominant, and they'd worked out immediately what was going to happen, and they counteracted it. So I think, as much as Keita deserves criticism, all the midfield deserves criticism, some of the forward line does as well. I think the manager's got to shoulder quite a bit of the blame for the way that played out.
Yeah, definitely. Just going to go down a rabbit hole slightly here in terms of the substitution thing. And Jurgen Klopp immediately alluded to it in his post-match press conference, sort of saying, because I brought a player off before half-time, everyone's going to talk about it. And I get it must be a bit of a embarrassing situation for Naby Keita himself, but certainly in the Champions League, Doyle, where you've got 5 substitutions. I watched the game the following night between Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain, and Hansi Flick made 2 substitutions in the first half of the game for seemingly tactical reasons as opposed to injury. And I'm just thinking, with the 5 substitutes, actually, surely if a game isn't going your way, why waste half of the match before rectifying it? Why should there be sort of this snobbery, I suppose, around actually using a first half substitute when you can replace half of the outfield players?
I think it's because it took place in the 42nd minute rather than the 34th or the 23rd. I think that's the thing. Is I think he's just thought Klopp saw it and just said, "Seen enough." As I said before, just thought we can't concede the third one. We just need to get him off and do something different now. And I suppose they didn't concede the third one, did they, in the first half? No. So you could say, well, that worked if that's what his aim was. But yeah, with Keita, it is interesting because he has been there for nearly 3 years now, and he's had some good moments, and he's quite clearly a good player. And we've spoken about him for 3 years. I know if Joe Rimmer was on, if he would have been on this podcast, he would have said he was worried about him. He's been saying that for 2.5 years now, hasn't he? So he's
on Poetry in Motion earlier in the week with Neil Fitzmaurice and Gorsty as well, and they said plenty. There's been a lot said across, obviously, the channel about it all. But I suppose on that, Doyle, you've kind of got the separating the issue, haven't you, of him being dragged off in this game, but also we're now 3 years into Naby Keita's Liverpool career, and he's still, you think of all the other big signings Liverpool have made and when fit their first names on the team sheet. Naby Keita's not really anywhere near that position, is he? No,
it's partly not his fault. He got injured, didn't he, quite early on, and then Liverpool obviously went on a good run. And, that's what happens. That's what happens at big teams when there's competition for places and players play well and you lose your place, whether you're injured or you've not had a good game. It's just what happens. It's interesting the amount of, because don't forget that Jurgen Klopp started Keita at Barcelona in the semi-final 2 years ago, so he obviously has a lot of trust in him, and he started him in the, I can't remember, did he start him in the Club World Cup final? He certainly played in the semi-final. I can't remember whether he played in the final. He presumably must.
I feel like he did play a decent part in that tournament.
Yeah, he presumably must have played in the final.
I know one of us set a couple of goals up, and he was on a run of 3 assists on the bounce. Actually,
yeah, he set up a goal in the first game, or he maybe even scored in the first game. I can't remember. It was that long ago. Yeah. There's been quite a few games since then. But point being that Keita, obviously Klopp wouldn't have signed him if he didn't think he was any good. Spent an awful lot of money, and I think he's still the 3rd most expensive player in Liverpool's history, isn't he? So I don't think he's been harshly treated by the outside. And I say it's certainly not been harshly treated by those inside the club either, because they keep giving him the opportunities. But I think Lynch is probably right. It may be coming towards the end. The only thing on that is that if Wijnaldum's going and James Milner's now about 78, then you've already lost Lallana last season. Suddenly, to lose 4 from the team or the squad that won the league in midfield, and for them to be experienced players as well, that might be a bit too much. So I would imagine, unless somebody comes in with a really good offer for Keita, he won't be going anywhere, because he's still probably better at Liverpool than he is not at Liverpool in terms of the money that Liverpool could get for him. It would cost them more than that to get in a like-for-like replacement. So I also don't think that Liverpool, I would imagine Klopp's not even thinking about this at the moment. He's just thinking about, all right, who can play against Aston Villa, who can play against Real Madrid, who can play against Leeds. And he'll still think that there's opportunities, because there's not just Keita, there's other players who've not played. We haven't seen Curtis Jones much, have we, recently? Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain did well against Wolves when he came on, and he hasn't, I don't think he's played since then, has he? And as I say, Milner did well against Arsenal, didn't get a kick. It's interesting, actually, about Milner is that I actually thought if he had played against Real Madrid, that would have been a slightly different game again. I mean, there has been some debate over whether Wijnaldum as a captain is the right choice. It's how much stock you put into somebody being the skipper. But we've seen the difference that Jordan Henderson that can make when he's out there. And Milner's certainly of the same kind of ilk. So I do wonder whether or not Liverpool, when things weren't going particularly well, they had enough, not so much experience, but enough vocal backing out there on the pitch to sort things out, because they've got sufficient leaders. But when people aren't playing well, you need someone who's going to rouse the troops. And I do wonder that if you've not got Van Dijk, you've not got Milner, you've not got Henderson, that those are the kind of nights where you miss those kind of players.
Yeah, definitely. Right, let's move on to Sadio Mane then, Lynch, and Doyle said before about the inexperience that Real Madrid had, certainly the cohesion in terms of a back four that Zinedine Zidane was able to name. Liverpool never really got at them, and I know there were three attackers on the pitch, but Jota and Salah did combine for the goal that Liverpool did get. What about Sadio Mane, though? Because he's looking energetic, he's looking lively up until the edge of the box, but I, for one, I think every time he's now within striking distance, you just don't have that confidence he's going to score.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the player himself as well, because it's true. I think he's getting in positions, isn't he? He's getting in the box, but he's just nowhere near as deadly as he was, and it's quite worrying really, because this is stretched over quite a long period of time. I think Firmino's form has taken a little bit of the heat off him, but Mane has been through a lot of lengthy goalless stretches throughout this season, and really seems to be struggling with his form. You worry about that. Is that burnout from the amount of football he's played over the years? A lot of people, that's been said about a lot of players in this squad, and I like to reserve judgment until the start of next season, after the players have had a full pre-season, a rest, the fans are back in, and it's a bit more like normal football. But it doesn't stop it being a bit of a worry. And I think going into the second leg, I think there's a difficult choice for Jurgen Klopp to make off the back of that performance from Sadio Mane, because I think when Jota is flying in the way he is, you clearly missed Firmino on both sides of the ball. Can't drop Salah because he has just kept scoring. I think that Mane's position on that left-hand side might be under threat in the coming weeks, because Jota has to start, and I think you lose too much when you drop Firmino out of there. So it's it's a difficult one for the manager, but I think a decision that has to be made, because Mane's form at the moment just isn't good enough to be getting game after game.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, anyone scratching their head wondering about Naby Keita, if he did play in the Club World Cup, I did look it up. I forgot to say he did start by the semi-final. He scored against Monterrey, and he started in the final. But on Mane, Doyle, in terms of stats for him, he's only scored twice at Anfield all season. One of those in
Liverpool have only scored twice at Anfield all season.
yeah.
So in that sense, he's been
he scored 100% of the goals. Yeah, but one of those was all the way back in September. I think second home game of the season, wasn't it, against Arsenal? He scored against West Brom since then. But that is one of the things with this Liverpool, certainly those two wide forwards, that you just expect week after week for them to score. And then when they stop, all of a sudden it very quickly becomes apparent and becomes an issue.
Isn't that the last Liverpool home goal from open play? That is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's incredible. They've gone 4 months without winning a game at home. It's we're
going to get onto that. Yeah,
it's absolutely ridiculous. Just because the Leipzig, at home, at Anfield, because obviously they beat Leipzig at, was it the Puskas Stadium in Budapest? I'm pretty sure they'd be quite happy playing the Aston Villa game on Saturday if they could. But yeah, with Mane, it just seems as though he's just taking too many touches, isn't he? He's just taking too many touches, and you always get the impression at the start of every game he's up for it. It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. Not a problem. And he's at Arsenal last week, for the first 20 minutes, he was the one that was running at the Arsenal backline, and he was getting a bit of joy. But the longer the game went on, the more he kind of just faded slightly out of it. And I wonder whether or not he's getting a little bit affected by what's happening overall to him. Because in terms of the officiating and not getting the penalties. Now, what I mean by that is, I remember they played Watford last season before they went to the Club World Cup, and he scored a header, and it was disallowed for VAR, and it would have made it 2. Now, Liverpool won 2-0 in the end. But I remember Mane then, for about 15 minutes after that, was absolutely not so much fuming, but he was just all over the place. He just couldn't. He thought he'd scored, so he wasn't there, basically.
Well, he had that in Madrid, didn't he? After that push ahead of the second goal, he then sort of the rest of the first half, and in the second half.
That's what I'm about to say, is that obviously after the game, we heard what Jurgen Klopp said to the referee, and said he'd been unfair, because whether or not you think that's a foul or not, there was certainly other incidents where you most certainly should have had a foul. I mean, and even if some of the time he was falling over a bit easily, the law of averages suggests that you're going to get some of them, but he wasn't really getting any of them. So there's been other instances. I mean, the Southampton penalty earlier this season, where he could have had a penalty. I think there was the Newcastle one as well, although that only kind of became apparent after the game when you saw the pictures. So whether or not he thinks that that's kind of going against him, and when you have that and then you don't score for a few games and the team's losing, and I'm not saying he takes it personally, but he's quite an emotive person, and he probably thinks he can be doing more, and he's getting more and more frustrated at the fact that he isn't, especially when you consider that since Coutinho left, what was it, January 2018, up until, you could argue, October this season, that Mane was just absolutely brilliant all the way through it. Like, he was scoring the goals, he was making the difference, he'd found his position, because obviously he'd been shifted over to the left when he'd done so well in his first season on the right. And since then, though, I mean, I know he's only missed, what was it, one game due to contracting coronavirus, and we've spoken about this in the past. You look at Trent, players like that who contracted it, and then they haven't quite been the same, certainly for a while afterwards. I mean, we'll only know that in years to come as to what the effects of that was. But he's still out there, he's still playing, he's still getting the chances, he's still doing his runs, he just doesn't seem to have that kind of instinctive quality that he gained over that period that I just said between 2018 and around about October. So it is a worry, but it would be more of a worry if Salah wasn't scoring, because that's the beauty of having three players up, well, four now if you count Jota, because they've still scored 24, was it 51, something like 57 goals between them or something like that. Quite a lot. So is it that many? I don't know. How many Salah got? 27?
I just nodded my head there.
Yeah, I was just nodding as well. Yeah,
it's 20. Salah's got 27. Mane's got 12. Jota's got 12, hasn't he?
Jota's got 12, yeah.
12, yeah. So that's 51. And I think Firmino's got 6. That would be 57. Right, yeah. It sounds about right, yeah. Let's get that. I got an A-level maths, would you believe? There you go. Yeah.
Firmino's got... Oh, wait, no, I was looking at the wrong season there. Yeah.
No.
Right.
So, anyway, the point being there's still an awful lot of goals besides Mane's, but you want a Mane to be playing at his best. And when, like, say, you got that game like Aston Villa away last season where Mane scores in the last minute and they were losing 1-0, suddenly it's 2-1. They need that kind of Mane back, because when the big games come around, he tends to, score in the Champions League final, didn't he, against Real Madrid, and won the penalty against Tottenham. So they need that kind of player back, and how they do it, I'm not sure. I think it's kind of in his mind. I think it's the old story, isn't it? If he gets one, he'll get 5. So I just think he needs one to go in somewhere. He
needs one to go in off his backside. Should we throw in another one there?
But what he needs more than anything, though, is if he misses the next one, just to not let it affect him. And I know that's easier said than done, but it's Klopp said that Liverpool are the mentality monsters. Well, now they're going to have to start showing it individually in different ways.
He was asked, Jurgen Klopp, in the press conference today, David, ahead of the Aston Villa game and what's to come, obviously, next week with Real Madrid, whether it's sort of about the pressure and the opportunity that lay ahead for Liverpool, both in the Premier League and the Champions League, about the pressure that they're under. So if Sadio Mane is in this poor form, does Jurgen Klopp then, for what could be a season-defining week, consider dropping one of his big players and, as you say, reinstating Roberto Firmino, going with Diogo Jota, and just telling Mane, it doesn't matter what stage of the season it is, you look like you need a rest, so you're going to be pulled out the firing line?
I think it's slightly easier to make those decisions with the season being the way it is, and we're getting into the business end now. It's been so chocker all the way through, hasn't it? And the fact that we're getting towards an even busier part where you're playing European games in midweek, I think that helps the manager in terms of he can sell it as, okay, if he wants to leave him out against Real Madrid, if that's the decision he makes, then he'll probably play Mane against Aston Villa, won't he? Give him 90 minutes and then say at the end of that, as we're getting towards a Real Madrid rematch, okay, listen, he played a lot of football. I just need freshness. I need those, those legs coming in. So, I think that makes it slightly easier to sell. Not that the player will be absolutely over the moon to be missing a game against Real Madrid, but I do think it makes it easier for the manager in that conversation. But it's a tough one, isn't it? I think when you pull in any of those out, and I think this is something he's found with Firmino, is that he's become so reliant on the way they play, that trusted them for so long in winning the biggest trophies, that you sort of almost forget some of the qualities that they bring to the table that you'll miss without them, and you only find that out as you start to sort of go down the road of replacing them. So, if we do put Jota in on the left-hand side and Mane comes out for a bit, is there something that Mane does that Liverpool will miss specifically? I suppose we'll have to see and we'll have to find out. But these are sorts of conversations and difficult decisions the manager's going to have to make in the years ahead, because, specifically these next couple of years, really, because this front three isn't going to last forever. And I think, Jota's been signed with the idea that he will still be there in 4 or 5 years. So, and Liverpool want another forward, don't they, in the summer, if they can move on Origi and Shaqiri. So that evolution is a constantly happening thing. And so you are going to have moments like this where you have to make difficult decisions, whether Jurgen Klopp puts it off for another week or another month, we'll have to see, won't we? But it's that's the sort of stuff that lies ahead for him.
There was a forward who looked pretty handy in that Bayern PSG game in the Champions League this week, and I'm not on about Eric Choupo-Moting either. But anyway, let's move on to Aston Villa, who come to Anfield on Saturday for the return of Premier League action. Doyle, we're going to have to address it now. The elephant in the room, the 7-2 against Aston Villa. You've been quite clear all season it was a one-off for Liverpool, but were they maybe the side who cracked the steely resolve that Liverpool have had and showed sides a way of exploiting that high line?
I think some things that people forget about that Villa game is, one, Adrian was in goal because Alisson had called off. And I'm pretty sure Mane didn't play either, did he? Because that's when he did have coronavirus, right? Yeah. Jota started. Van Dijk and Gomez started. Gomez was absolutely awful in that game. Probably the worst he's ever played. I just think that was a game where so many things came together. Even Dean Smith, the Villa manager, said today, look, it was a good result for us, but it was a bit strange because we scored 3 deflected goals. I mean, they had 3 shots from outside the area that hit somebody and went in. So, okay, even if they don't go in, it's 4-2 and Liverpool deserve to get beat 4-2. And you go, well, that's not a very good result. But 7-2, I've said this so many times. You look at, Liverpool played Arsenal last week and they got the biggest ever top flight league win at Arsenal. There's so many of that this season. There's so many strange circumstances. I wonder why. It's because it's a strange season. What a surprise that these things are happening. But going back to your initial point, it perhaps kind of brought to a head a lot of things that perhaps Liverpool, I'm not saying they were being complacent after they'd won the league, but I think some of the players thought, yay, we've won the league. And now we can take a rest. Not so much a rest, but we don't have to play quite at that same level. But you add in the goalkeeper situation, mentioned Mane. I think, was Henderson on the bench for that game? I think he wasn't he? Didn't come on. Yeah. And I think, funny enough, Keita got substituted at half-time in that game. And I remember being there thinking, that's totally harsh because he was actually one of the players who did all right. I think Minamino replaced him at half-time. That's how. So there's another example of, Liverpool losing 4-1. Let's just go for it even more. So that's why. So it's kind of it's funny how these things come around. It's just 6 months down the line, we're still talking about the same things. Klopp isn't going to change the way that he does things. So I don't think we can just forget anybody who thinks he's going to do that. But the 7-2, that genuinely, you saw with Klopp's comments today, that hurt Liverpool, and he says, that shouldn't be happening, and it shouldn't be. What was it? Worst defeat in 57 years in the league, wasn't it? So, I mean, it wasn't. To be fair, it wasn't even the first time in 12 months that Liverpool had lost by 5 goals at Aston Villa. But at least the first time was when the kids were playing. So there was a bit of
Liverpool in recent times has been a very, very odd fixture, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But you were talking then about the tactics, and I think one thing that Aston Villa got right, and they also got it right against Liverpool last season in both games, which they lost both the league games, is runners from midfield, and Liverpool really struggled to cope with that in that 7-2. They had chances in the 2-1, but they were mainly off set pieces. But in the 2-0 game where Liverpool won at home, I thought Aston Villa did quite well. Bear in mind that they were at that point fighting against relegation, and they could have easily taken something from that game. Liverpool only scored the second late on, and even then, I think Grealish, who we know isn't going to be playing on Saturday, he forced a good save from Alisson. So I think Villa, they haven't got the key to unlock Liverpool, but they know ways to hurt them. And Liverpool will probably have to get the finger out or get the thinking caps on and go, well, hang on, we don't want this to happen again, because the runners from midfield, and I think Ollie Watkins just ran at them. So if you just, it was another game where Fabinho, I'm pretty sure he'd play. Yeah, he did play, but it was just weird. The whole game was just like by the end, I was just laughing when the goals were going in. It was just hilarious. It wasn't proper football, and it underlined everything that I kind of have said about this entire season. It's not real. It's just you saw that Bayern. Sorry to interrupt, Guy. That Bayern Munich Paris Saint-Germain game, which actually
it was basketball, wasn't it?
Just watch. It was one of these games where they just went, "There's no one here. Who's bothered? Let's just play. Let's just play some game. Let's see what happens. Yeah, let's just do it." And it was just ridiculous. There was no midfield. How many games this season have you seen where there's just no midfield? Again? No.
Interesting. But the Aston Villa squad, Dave, looking at them, and they kept themselves up and they've built on it really well. They do seem to have a very balanced squad, albeit, Jack Grealish isn't going to be fit. They've not been in great form without him as well. He's such a talismanic figure. But they do still have the likes of John McGinn in the midfield. They've got Ollie Watkins at the top end of the pitch who can cause a threat. And defensively, we know Liverpool struggles at Anfield to score, let alone win a game. Ezri Konsa's been a real good player for them too.
Yeah, really, really like Aston Villa's squad, to be honest. They've just, more than the few you mentioned there. I like both the fullbacks, Cash and Target. I think they're top players. Just think all the way through that team, there's just really good quality, and fair play to them because they've built on staying up, haven't they? And I think the manager made a few demands about what he wanted, having achieved that, and they've really given what he wanted. They've brought in some really top players, and they're a really decent side. I think, looking back to that 7-2, at the time it was said that here we go, it's Liverpool cracking, and it seems like that narrative has almost been proved, doesn't it, because of what's happened since. But I think, as Doyle put it, quite a few weird things happened in that match, not just the deflections, but there was all, if you remember, the week after was just talk about Liverpool's high line and how disastrous that setup was. Now that looks true in the aftermath of, say, the Real Madrid result, but obviously you look at the two players that were playing centre half in the most recent game, and it's no wonder that high line looks disastrous. I think if you'd have had Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez playing that high line for the remainder of the season, Liverpool wouldn't have had any issues whatsoever. I think they went on that run then to be top of the league after that at Christmas. So the problem is that Aston Villa know how to exploit certain elements of Liverpool's system that have been weakened by the injuries they've got, and I think that's what makes this game really difficult. If Aston Villa play in the same way that they did at Villa Park earlier this season, I think they'll cause Liverpool similar issues because that high line's still going to be there. They're still going to be able to, I feel like Matty Cash was dropping into a sort of a right-sided deep midfield area and pinging balls diagonals over the top and was catching Liverpool every time in that 7-2. And I think there's a possibility that might happen again at Anfield. It's going to be a difficult one for Phillips and Kabak, and I think another key one really for Jurgen Klopp needs to get his midfield selection spot on again, doesn't he? I think he needs to pick a midfield that's going to be, whatever midfielder he picks, I think has to be the same one that goes into the Real Madrid game, just to get some rhythm in there and get that ability to sort of try and get pressure on the ball, even though the opposition are moving players around about where they play those balls over the top from. I think that's going to be a key part of the game for Liverpool is stopping that supply line over in behind the back four.
Yeah, we've seen so many times as well during this run of poor form at Anfield, Doyle sides come to Anfield, sit deep, and then look to exploit gaps and get Liverpool on the counter. But that more trying to play into the hands of Liverpool, struggling to break them down. But you feel Villa will probably want to employ similar tactics, as David was alluding to there, to try and get that defence, certainly with Phillips and Kabak, as high up the pitch as possible, with Watkins with the pace that he has.
Yeah, it's going to be really boring. It's going to be a really boring game, as it always is at Anfield these days. Absolute tedium personified.
Make sure you check out Ian Doyle's work across the live blog.
Having said say that, but what's that? 9 + 5 is 14. There's been 19 goals in the last 3 games between Liverpool and Villa. So, this is actually the game where all the goals come in.
There's 6-0 not that long ago as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Actually, yeah. So
most of these, all of these, are happening at Villa Park, but. It was a 5-0, 2009? Can we go back that far to?
Yeah, I think some of our listeners and viewers will have been alive in 2009. They'll be able to remember. You know what I mean? It wasn't that long ago. I'll be honest.
I still have it.
Hang on a minute. How old were you in 2009?
What was I? 16, 15?
Lynch, you were 40. What? 33. There you go. Was I? No, I wasn't. Hang on. What is it? Yeah, I was. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, what was the question?
I was saying Villa are going to try and get Liverpool to come on to them and go in behind.
I think for Villa, it's an interesting one because if they win their games in hand, they can actually go 1 point behind fourth place. So they're still very much in this. I think that's right. I think they're very much in the running for certainly European place. And this is a big game for them. I don't think Villa can afford to do what some of the other teams have done and just sit back and play for a draw, because that's of no use to them whatsoever. They've got a certain amount of freedom because they've spent the last season was fighting against relegation. The season before was fighting to get back up. So they'll be allowed a certain amount of freedom, and I think that will hopefully benefit Liverpool because they won't just sit back and defend like just about every other team has done at Anfield over the past 39 years.
Yeah, it has felt that long, definitely. Let's move on to our team selection then. Lynch, you were saying before, big midfield questions for Jurgen Klopp, so let's get into it. Alisson in goal, but he's shaved off the moustache, hasn't he, guys?
Yeah, drop him.
What a dreamboat. What a dreamboat. He's the only person who can have a beard, a moustache, and then be clean-shaven and looks that good. with the exception of me.
Right, moving on. Defence. Doyley, what's the back four going to be?
Right, I keep on saying Simicast every single week, don't I?
Yeah, you do.
And I do feel as though he has to play at some points, but this is the one where I'm going to say he's not going to play. I think the back four's just got to be the back four. Simple as that.
I was going to say maybe Robertson. I think he maybe got off a bit lightly with his performance on Tuesday. Maybe this is the game to drop him for. Lynchy, what about you? Are you going to go with the usual tried and trusted now? Played all but 5 games together?
I would quite like to see Simicast come in for a game just because I think, it would be nice to see him, and I think Robertson's form he was poor, wasn't he, on Tuesday, and just to give him a rest going into that Real Madrid rematch, I think would be quite good. But I just don't expect it, to be honest. I think he's going to go with the same back four, and he wants to get rhythm into that back four. Or considering he played about 50 odd games on the bounce, I think he's going to stick with it. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Davis and Simicast just on the touchline doing keep ball with each other.
Well, as a question, somebody was asking me this. Is there any chance that Fabinho could go back to centre-back ahead of the Real Madrid game? Because he to then play there against Real Madrid? Yeah. Does anybody think there's anything in that? Because, my answer was no. But
I don't think so, because in the Real Madrid game, Liverpool need to get goals. I think he might help sturdy things up defensively, but actually one of his real underrated qualities is those balls forward from deep, isn't it? And I think Liverpool are going to need him actually as much of an attacking Arsenal on the pitch as they can, and I think he's better in that position, therefore in midfield.
Plus, you would then have to put Keita in midfield, wouldn't you, if you put Fabinho in defence? And I don't think Jurgen Klopp wants to do that anymore.
There's loads of midfielders that could play.
Curtis Jones.
It's a big ask of him, though, isn't it?
I think he's proven this season that he deserves a go. I think.
Yeah. And if anyone's going to love it, it'll be him, won't he?
Yeah.
Anyway,
man for the big occasion.
The midfield for Villa.
Well, can you go to Lynchy? Could be Curtis, couldn't it? Yeah.
Can you go to Lynchy first?
Lynchy, you go first, mate.
I think because he'll be worried about the way that the midfield played on Tuesday, and I think he'll think there's enough gap between the games. I think he might go with the same against Villa as he goes against Real Madrid, and I think that could be then Fabinho, Thiago, and Wijnaldum, and then obviously if he can then make some changes early on and get Curtis Jones on or get James Milner on just to make sure those players are fresh. But I think having mixed it up what he had as a unit there, I think he'll want to get it settled and sorted before the Real Madrid game if he can, because he's not going to go with the same three, is he? So yeah, I think it might sort of pick itself, and that'd be his strongest midfield on paper, which would be Thiago, Wijnaldum, and Fabinho.
I know we're a sort of full decade without a goal at Anfield, but I reckon Milner comes into the midfield maybe for Wijnaldum.
Well, my team is going to be 4-2-3-1 because I think they're going to go 4-2-3-1 against Real Madrid, but not with these players. The two I'm going to pick against Villa are Fabinho and Milner. Milner on the left side, Fabinho on the right, and then the one that joins up with the front three, probably Curtis Jones.
Yeah, I reckon that can play in a 4-3-3 anyway, can't it? Because Milner did get fooled quite a lot against Arsenal. Now, Arsenal were pretty much on their goal line the whole game, but he did have that shot in the first half. But anyway, Doyley, come back to you then for the forward three. Who's your 2 and 1 in the 4-2-3-1?
Well, I think it's yes. What you mean the wide players will be Jota and Salah, and up front will be Firmino.
Mane dropped. Lynchy, you going along with that?
I think you might keep Mane in for this one and drop him for the Real Madrid game. So maybe Salah, Mane, Firmino, and then he makes the big call against Real Madrid, and Jota starts on the left hand side maybe.
Do you think the thing with the 4 players he's got at the top end of the pitch with Jota, I think they started once together against Manchester City, and Jota came off after an hour, or did they start the game?
No, I think they started against Sheffield United.
Yeah. And went 1-0 behind in that game, though, didn't they?
Well, against Sheffield United, I'm pretty sure they changed it at half time. Certainly did badly in the second half. And against City worked out after 25 minutes. So
I was going to say, the point I was going to make on it, though, is do you think it's been far more effective having the 4 of them on the pitch when any one of them, normally Jota, has come onto the pitch and they've then gone to a 4, as opposed to the 4 of them all starting, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a better option when you change to it mid-game rather than starting out with it. I think, because I think that those cagey moments early in the game and the fact that teams will do everything they can to restrict space in the early moments, particularly across the first half. To have the four of them just getting in each other's way with the little space that's there already it becomes a bit of a problem. I think when you introduce it late in the game, spaces are opening up, players are getting tired, and there's just a little bit more chaos going on. And I think it really suits them to do that, which is maybe what would keep him from going with all four in the sort of the second leg against Real Madrid. He would maybe think that it's best to go with whatever he thinks his first choice three is, and then change it from there.
Yeah, right. What about match results then? Liverpool 6 defeats in a row. Something about the number 7 with Aston Villa this season. It's not going to be a 7th defeat in a row, is it, Doyle?
Well, technically speaking, they've won the last home game against.
Yeah, they're in great form at home.
Yeah, they're in a great. They're brilliant at home. Yeah. Do you mean
Anfield, Puskás Arena?
Yes, Anfield. I think that as I will be there and I cannot cope with another unbelievably boring game, I will go with 3-2 for Liverpool.
By the way, on the Puskás Arena, we've got Anfield South being Wembley, Anfield West maybe being Millennium Stadium. Is that Anfield East out in Budapest?
Yes.
Anfield East in Europe, yeah. I go with that. Yeah.
Yeah, happy days. Lynchy, what about the match result for you?
I fancy Liverpool to bounce back. I think they were very good against Arsenal. It's quite easy to forget that Real Madrid are just quite good, aren't they? And Aston Villa are not as good as Real Madrid. So surely Liverpool can win this one and sort of get themselves right in that top 4 race. So I'm going to go 2-0.
Yeah, hopefully that is the case. Hopefully we've lifted spirits as well on this edition of the Blood Red podcast as Liverpool look to go to end that open play goal drought at Anfield. You can make sure you keep across everything that Doyley is up to at Anfield on match day in the Liverpool Echoes.
Not everything.
No, I thought everything went in the live blog. Well, that will be the live blog, of course, across on the Liverpool Echo website. We'll be here with the debrief on the Blood Red channel after the game, as well as Jurgen Klopp's post-match reaction. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time and your company. That's all for now.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.